you remember, we suspect that this sending unit might be leaking, and that's actually a temperature switch for that TCS system. I found a couple on eBay, but I'm not going to get that system working anyway. What a lookalike is an older sending unit for the gauge. I'm just going to screw this in. How crusty do you think this is going to be on the back side of it?
Bad. Yeah, it looks like it was replaced at one time.
It does. It has
It's got jipe on it that's more modern.
well, not that bad. Pretty similar.
He's got these spark plugs starting the whole thing off fresh, so everything's going to be new, and then we'll be able to watch it and know what's going on if everything's sealed up. But he was wondering about gap. Now that we got 12 good volts going to a HEI ignition, you can have a bigger gap. You know, most of the time they were like 32 thousandths. I'm setting these at 40, and the bigger you can make a gap, the more of a spark, you're gonna get better gas mileage. We're hoping with now the timing being fixed up, everything running fresh, a new torque converter, we're hoping it'll be a little bit more peppier than before. I ended up having this really, you know, like MSD box on it, and used the HEI ignition. They said set the gap at 85. I'm setting the gaps. I'm like, holy shit, you know, that looks pretty big. And I watched it. When you could even hear the spark when you'd crank it over. You could hear it like that. And what happened was the cap melted the little carbon arc, and there's a little rubber disc like with grease on it, but it melted in the cap. And I just happened to be taking it apart, and I saw this, and then the guy says, oh, you got too much resistance, and then instead of firing the gap, you're heating up that carbon. So I dropped the gaps down to 50. Here's the fuel pump that we're going to use. One thing cool about Pontiac that Chevys don't have, this has a return line. So if you're just, normally on a small block Chevy, you had one that bolted together, and you go, oh, that's really nice. You can rotate it depending on what kind of car it's in, the frame rails or whatever, how you're going to feed the fuel lines. You can rotate it, index it so that the fuel lines are clear. And they've had shows on TV where guys will have the fuel line hooked up wrong. You'd think that before they even did it, this is very self-explanatory with Pontiac because they have a hard line that goes all the way up to the carburetor, and it's a big one. And this would be your feed line, and this is your return line. It's a little bit smaller. They try to make it idiot-proof. But you'd think that in any engine where you've got two fittings, somebody would stick their finger over it and, manipulate the pump and feel suction. Right, you got it hooked up so that vacuum is going up to the carburetor, and they're sitting there cranking the motor over on a brand new engine, and they're trying to get fuel to the carburetor and it doesn't want to start, and then they find out that they got it hitched up wrong. When you start a brand new engine, you should even fill the carburetor through the vent, have the timing already set, so when you turn that key on, it's just boom, and you got instant oil pressure, because you've primed the oil pump. You don't want to be cranking on a dry engine too long. It's not a good thing. But this is, when you looked at Pontiacs or Buicks or other Oldsmobile, they always had stuff that was a little bit more tricked out than just a regular old run-of-the-mill Chevy engine. I thought this was pretty cool having a return line. Now let's go of when you got a carburetor and it's just deadheaded against the float needle. It's hard on it if you can relieve some of that pressure when it's just idling. But a lot of guys with race cars are always trying to extract as much horsepower as they can. And if you take one of these things and try to pump that with your legs. You see how much horsepower that's taking? And then a water pump, you know, you're turning that. You know, when you can have an electric fan on there, there's a lot of horsepower, they call it parasitic losses. If you could end up taking that off, that's like free horsepower. But the obnoxious thing, if you got the old electronic fuel pumps bolted to the frame and you start your car up, it's going and it's vibrating. They give you little rubber cushions between the fuel pump and the frame. It still makes a vibracious noise in the car, and it's something that a lot of guys put on their car back in the old days and they took off because they couldn't stand listening to it. So we're gonna roll this thing over. You're gonna have to roll it over. I got my finger in the spark plug hole, and we're gonna have this thing up to like 12 degrees before top dead center. And when we put the distributor in, then you have it where it's just ready to, you know, a number one spark plug. So when we end up firing it up, there's none of that playing around with it. We'll prime the carburetor, and we go to turn it, it's just gonna be BAM! And be firing up. Right there. Alright, while that motor's out, it's easier to work on because we can sit down and put stuff together. I'm gonna put this on, I'm gonna put some assembly lube on here so it's lubricated when we start it. And then we'll put some never sees on here because they're stainless steel going into aluminum timing chain cover. I hate working with this stuff. This doesn't even stink that bad. Some of this stuff smells like vinegar. I'm going to put it on both sides. And my hands are all full of crap. How do you route it then? Over to this side?
Yeah, there's actually supposed to be a clip that bolts on down here
Okay.
and then holds these
The tie wrap?
these rubber lines right here.
Oh. Jeez.
I searched over the gasket that fitted properly. When we took it apart, it had this thing on there. It was all hanging out the end goofy, looked terrible. Using a high temp sealer on it here. Wait, what keeps that gasket aligned?
I don't know.
There's supposed to be pins in that thing?
Yeah. It's missing dowel pins.
Let's put them in it.
You got dowel pins?
Yeah. We got a couple dowel pins that's barely sticking up out of this EGR to hold our gasket square. Gasket doesn't move now, and they're recessed, so it should tighten up fine.
I'm just putting this shark oil on there. I don't know if this will burn off or just trying to keep it so it doesn't get rusty. There was no coating on this whatsoever.
If you recall, I blocked off the passages to this with the intake gasket, so hopefully it doesn't get as hot as it normally would. I kind of have a plan to have like mock emissions on this motor, so it looks like it might work, but it's definitely not going to be functional. We're going to pop our distributor in. We'll have the cap off of it when we put the engine in the car. We are going to run a gasket, and then we will check to make sure that we got clearance there. I've already done that, but
Put some grease on here.
a little assembly lube.
This is another issue if you ever have one of these. Back when you had points, a lot of these would have a ton of end play. Remember, everything warms up, expands, could get tighter. But back in the old days, you'd get some of these and they went, you know, up and down, and you try to tighten it up a little. You don't want it totally tight because it's got to have movement for expansion. But you don't want this thing to go in and be pushing down. That's another thing. You don't want it, like if there's a gap and you're putting a clamp on driving it down, because there's all kinds of stuff that gets machined in different types of cars. You'd never want to be forcing down on your pump.
So we got to
That's
go.
that far. You want a little bit more.
We got to turn more. So we've marked our rotation of our rotor when it's running and our number one cylinder. We just set this so it's kind of pointed at the number one. We put a Sharpie mark on our intake where that rotor's pointing. And roughly at about 15 degrees advance, we locked it down. We advance it more, we'll gain more clearance on this hose. But then this is starting to come over. We'll have to see how it plays out. We can always run this to the other side. Do you want to lift that rotor up and down, Paul? See if we have any bind on it. That should be fine.
Yeah.
And it locks down fine now. I put a little bit longer bolt in it. I had to straighten out this plate, but it's good and tight.
So if you ever looked at the video that was on the teardown of the motor, you could see how this was like slow motion. It was so gummed up. This is like, just springs back really quick.
We're going to make another run at putting this engine back in. I got some new cheapo motor mounts for it, and they didn't quite want to go on. It's kind of a goofy setup here. We got a metal on metal type situation. This thing rides like right on there. The reason I'm replacing these guys is this one was starting to split already. I looked around for some polyurethane mounts, but I didn't really see much. I saw Butler Performance had some solid mounts, but I don't want to go that direction with this car. But anyhow, on the back side, you can see where it was rubbing here. And this one has like a lot of the rubber from the injection process sticking up there. So I think I'm going to trim this off because it was just that tight. And then we'll try it again. If I remember right, the passenger header didn't come out until we pulled the engine out. And I think the driver's one slipped right out of there. So I've wired that up somewhat in place. It's kind of looking like this guy got tweaked over. I don't know if that was done intentionally or what, but I'm going to try to get this guy in without doing it.
You'll see that I did get it connected, okay? But when it's bolted up to the motor and it's tight, then what happens is the bolt, you know, as I got it bolted up tight to the motor, all of a sudden this is down here. Like this is laying right on metal. It can't get any closer. And the bolt is like pointing down here. Rocking the motor, lifting the back of it. It's really tight there.
It's like something's interfering. We've come to the conclusion that we need that extra little bit to get this engine to go in. Instead of bending ours, we just move the nut down a little bit of die grinding, welding, and hopefully that's just enough to help us get that bolt in there. Well, we finally got the motor mount in there after a couple hours of messing around.
I've never had a situation this ridiculous, but after we moved the bolt further down, then the bolt, lined up and, it should have been a 10-minute job. And this is the kind of stuff that frustrates people to the point where they just want to quit working on cars.
I suspect it might possibly be the motor mount itself, but not 100% on that.
So we're ready to put the transmission in, and just like every other project, we always put oil in here so that we aren't going to be starting this up dry.
Bloop. Could jiggle it, I guess. No.
Alright, so I'm having a situation here. Usually you just stick this thing on. This car is fighting us every bit. You just slide it on, you turn it a few times, and you keep on putting pressure against it. It should drop in and clunk, 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 and then it slides in further. I'm getting it on. Turning. She's not dropping in.
You can see in the bottom how much is sticking out.
Wiggling it. We finally got this on. It's struggling. And the motor is now mounted. And it was a pain in the butt getting this torque converter to engage for some reason. But we got that in, and it's not even bolted up to the cross member. It's late at night on a Thursday, and we're calling it quits tonight. But the engine tranny is in.